Hello, my name is Neha Chalangi. I'm a journalist at CUTV, and today I'm going to be talking to Erik Chevrier about food insecurity, what's driving up food prices in Montreal and around Canada today, and what food sovereignty can look like in the city through urban agriculture, transforming our current food systems, and how we can do that. Hi, Erik. Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about food insecurity and food sovereignty in Montreal. I would love if you could talk a little bit about the work that you do and your involvement in food sovereignty in Montreal.
Wonderful. Yeah, well, thank you for having me. So my name is Erik Chevrier. I'm a part-time professor at Concordia University. I've really been quite active in the urban agriculture movement across Montreal. So basically working in Lachine, establishing a farm in Lachine and attaching it to what we call les petits marchés, which is little markets in and around Lachine, basically localizing food. A lot of the food is actually grown at the farm in Lachine and actually in peri-urban environments, basically connecting to like other farms like Carrier farms and other places that are around as well. The goal really is to localize food, to give people access to fresh, local, and organic food, and basically to make an impact on our communities. A lot of the issues that I'm going to be talking about today have to do with a lot of like geopolitics and like kind of big picture, like macro involvement of our broken food system. And I think by localizing, that's not the complete solution, but is one step in the right direction where, we could actually develop food sovereign communities and actually have people that are actually, part and parcel of, their food system, either by taking part in growing it, being part of distribution, like getting to know farmers through farmers markets, or, really being part of food processing and food waste management as well. Part of another initiative that we founded, basically coming from the Lachine project, is a co-op called Co-op Cult of Action, which is an urban agriculture and education cooperative. So we grow food at Concordia, at Loyola campus, and we have pay what you can markets at Concordia. But also, we are actually teaching people how to convert local spaces into urban agriculture. So in NDG, there's a lot of people with yard spaces. There's like a lot of parks and different things around that. We could actually think of cities as like food forests, and little kind of pockets in cities as places to grow quite abundant food. For example, like we have very small spaces in and around Concordia. We have about a quarter of an acre, and we could actually grow quite a bit of food in that small space. We could think about this as multiplying these spaces in and around Montreal and actually really having a dent on, a lot of the food that could be produced inside of a city, but also kind of connecting to other areas as well, like peri-urban environments, as well as like, more rural farmers close to Montreal also.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you so much for going into that. Yeah, I would love to kind of start off with why food prices are going so high today. Like, what are the different factors that you've been seeing that have been affecting the food prices as of lately?
Yeah, so I guess consumers have noticed that food prices are going up quite drastically, and this is causing big problems, especially when people are have limited incomes. Some of the incomes are actually not even seeing the same rates of inflation that the food prices or other prices have gone. So there's actually two reports that I'd like to draw from. One actually was just published by Dalhousie, UBC, Guelph, and University of Saskatchewan. They're basically looking at a food price report for 2024, making predictions, but also looking at some indicators as to why food prices have increased over the past year. So some of the things is, climate change is definitely a factor. So, farms are getting devastated by fires, by floods, and by natural disasters, which is causing food prices to rise. There's a lot of geopolitical conflicts that are taking place that are actually disrupting supply chains and making it difficult to import food from different regions. There's rises in farm inputs as well. So the costs that farmers are actually accruing by the inputs that they're using is going up. Energy costs are going up as well. So oil and gas is also increased as well. And then there's another thing as well. So I know people have been looking at this, and this is quite concerning for a lot of people. Is the grocery stores are actually making record profits right now. Loblaws have recorded record profits of $621 million last year. Metro, I think, recorded about $222 million in profits, and this is up quite significantly from the years before. So what is happening here is what they're calling is basically seller's inflation. So because of the pandemic, there was a shock to the market. And the grocery stores didn't really want to accrue these costs on themselves. They want to actually maintain their rates of profitability like they were doing before. So they actually raised prices quite drastically because of that. But at the same time, what they did is that they actually lowered the rate of what they're paying their employees as well. So employees actually from 2018 to 2020 were actually getting increases in their salaries. And, since the pandemic, a lot of those salaries were cut right back down, as well as they're actually employing less people as well. So those two things going together, them raising prices and actually cutting their employee salaries and, having less employees actually attributes to these record profits that they're accruing currently. So
Hmm.
these are some of the things. The Broadbent Institute also took a look at the grocery store prices, and actually we're looking at like what is going on, and also kind of agrees with the other report that I was talking about, the Canadian Food Price Report. So they're looking at climate change being a major factor as well, kind of devastating some of the crops and making it very difficult conditions to grow. Supply chains as well, so disruption because of geopolitical events, the energy sector, and they also mentioned financialization of the grocery stores. So basically, grocery stores are publicly traded companies, and are owned by large corporations or individuals as well. And because of the financialization of the grocery stores, is that profit becomes very important for people that are actually investing into the stock market. So because of the financialization, it seems that like the short-term gains are very important rather than, the society itself and people's ability to acquire food. So these are some of the major conditions that have been talked about as to why food prices are going up. And I wish I could just say
Hmm.
it's one thing altogether, but it's a whole combination of things that seem to, have not really been solved into the future. And, we could see price increases based on, current geopolitical events, climate change, and other things exacerbating certain issues as well.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I think everyone saw these faults that were so present within our food systems during COVID, and that has kind of just exacerbated in the last couple of years. And we see all these different factors that have intermingled together and sort of created this environment that is not really sustainable for the way that we consume food. Um, I'm wondering what you think is I know you just talked about what's wrong with our food systems today, but what are sort of the policies that you see in a municipal level, in a provincial level, that could be impacting for the better these food systems?
Okay, so I guess some of the things that we could do to mitigate some of the food prices and some of the, I guess, the inflation in food prices that we've seen, we're extremely dependent on importing food. And I think, looking at some of the indicators, geopolitical conflicts, input costs rising, climate change, and all of this stuff, I think that it's really important for us to start to understand how to localize food better. So, we are importing right now like arugula from California into Montreal, like Dole and like some major corporations. Basically, we import it, and these things are readily found in our grocery store. Arugula is really easy to grow. We could produce it pretty much in like 3 weeks if we were to plant it in Montreal. At any kind of like urban farm, we could even grow it in greenhouses. This kind of stuff we don't need to import from across the world. We could actually, grow it locally. Other things also is, we could start to localize our markets as well. So we're reliant on major grocery stores like Loblaws, like Metro, like Walmart, where we could actually start to create these distribution points that actually cut out the middlemen. We're doing so in Lachine, where we've set up Les Petits Marchés de Lachine, and other communities could actually start to do the same as well. So these are kind of two things when we're looking at like more of a food sovereignty approach. Is that I think localization is something that we should start to rely on a lot more. Other things that we could do though is that we could actually start to regulate competition. There's been a bill that's been introduced, is Bill C-59, to actually give the competition tribunal a little bit more power to be able to, establish anti-competition laws between the grocery store sellers and make sure that they're actually, following suit and not overcharging. The bread company of Canada actually were charged $50 million for overcharging on bread and actually had to then compensate consumers by $50 million. Um, So these are some things we could actually regulate and make sure that the anti-competition laws are being are respected well. But at the same time, we could actually have progressive taxes, what they call windfall taxes. So if grocery stores raise their profit or their price margins based on certain shocks in the market, if they start to actually profit because of that, we could actually have caps on profitability, and then that could go back into our tax base. We could look at price controls as well. We could actually strengthen the working class as well when it comes to like unions and even just getting more income. Part of the problem with food insecurity is that actually people's wages are not actually right now at the same level as inflation. So people are not able to spend as much as they used to. So these kind of things I think will help with the current prices that have been increasing. But I think like in the bigger picture, though, we actually need to start thinking about more food sovereignty and connecting people to their local communities and communities to local food.
Hmm. I just want to go back to the bill 59, the
Yeah,
C-59 that you mentioned.
56. Sorry.
56. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And you mentioned that it was implemented in one situation. Has that been enforced in other ways?
Well, the bill is supposed to address the rising of housing prices as well
Okay.
as food inflation. And
Hmm.
basically, the idea really is to give more power to the competition tribunal so that people can't just or companies can't just raise prices as much as they want. Really, making sure that people can't actually afford housing and food. This is
Hmm.
actually something that's new, and I don't know how this is going to, come into effect and actually really be able to mitigate the prices of housing and food rising. But I guess we're going to have to
Hmm.
see what comes into play over the next like couple of years.
Right. Because in the beginning, when you were talking about how Loblaws and Metro and sellers inflation and how they've just been raising the prices, I mean, I'd hope that something like this bill would be able to enforce limits to what they're doing.
Exactly. Yeah. So that is the goal that's been projected. I guess we'll have to see, I guess how much power this bill really has to mitigate these consequences.
Right. Yeah. Um, I want to talk a little bit about food sovereignty and models of food sovereignty that have piqued your interest recently, whether that's what you've been working on or things that you've been seeing around the country. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we could do food a lot differently than we currently do. So we rely on these big industrial farms that are actually really causing major problems when it comes to climate change. So they're extremely carbon intensive. By tilling the soil, they're releasing all of these carbons into the air. They're actually limiting biodiversity because they're using like very similar patented seeds and creating these monocultures. On top of that, they're using chemical pesticides and fertilizers. The fertilizers are creating dead zones in the waters. So you'll see some in the Great Lakes in the Gulf of Mexico. Like all of these things are detrimental to our world. But this is what we're relying on to produce our food. So I think we need to think past that and we need to actually localize food, but we need to start growing with better methods. We need to introduce regenerative methods into farming where we're actually not putting in all of these chemical inputs, but actually building proper soil, using plant compost and, animal fertilizer compost basically into the farms as well. Not using monocultures, but actually having more polycultures and diversity of crops. And I think these things will be a lot better for environment. But I would love to see these projects, multiply across Canada. I think in urban landscapes, we could actually have like edible forests. We could have, localized like smaller farms to produce like things that grow quickly, like arugula, like radishes. All of these things could be grown in the middle of the city. And things that require more space and more time to grow, we could actually grow in either peri-urban or more rural environments close by Montreal. Also, if we're looking at Montreal, um, for example, like wheat farming and stuff like that, probably wouldn't be done in urban agriculture, but could be linked to places that are conducive to growing these crops close by the cities. And if we can think of like cities as permaculture guilds, we could actually start to construct growing areas that are conducive more for localization, but to also introduce people to food as well. There's not very much in urban landscaping when it comes to like food forests and things like that. People have to go look for places to forage in order to go find food. But we could be actually planting apple trees and pear trees, and we could be growing like kale and different things, and as even I guess like ornamental plants. If we go to the parks in Montreal, it's like quite austere. There's like just grass everywhere and like kind of like park benches and things like that. But why don't we have like other things like growing food wise? Amaranth looks really nice. It could be actually quite beautiful altogether, but could serve other purposes as well. So I really think that we need to change our mentality, and a lot of kind of the fixes that have been talked about in this report are still thinking of this like large macro, more import export based food system, and reliant on the broken food system that is causing a lot of the problems that are actually leading to price increases in food. So, these are the things that I think we really need to focus on. And I wish there was like a quick, easy fix solution and say, okay, this is exactly what we need to do, and here are all the steps. But what it really takes is that people actually need to start understanding what the bigger picture is and where the problems lie. And we need to then start to figure out solutions and root ourselves into our own food system. People have been very disconnected from their own food. And a lot of times I ask my students even like, how many people here cook? To which, probably half the class will cook. That's great. But when I ask who grows food, the numbers start to drop to the extent that when I ask, who composts at home, we're like looking at very few people that do that. So maybe one or two in a class of like 100. People are very disconnected from growing food, from producing food, to the extent of like how many people produce their own breads, even like people consume these things quite often, but we're reliant on grocery stores to basically like go in and make all of our purchases. So I think the big thing for me is actually about connecting people to the food processes, not only for them, like not everybody's going to be a farmer, but if people start to understand the conditions and livelihoods of farmers and the conditions of food, I think we're going to start to respect it a lot more. Like one thing
Hmm.
to kind of add on to this conversation, when we're talking about food prices, we have consumers that are quite getting gouged because the inflation on food prices has not really met the inflation in their salaries. But at the bottom, also, like farmers are not making ends meet. Also, it's the grocery store owners right now that are profiting the most. A lot of farmers, are struggling, especially like people that are doing organic farming on like small to medium scale. And there's a contradiction when it comes to food prices and what farmers' compensation are. And we realize this quite well, actually, in Cult of Action. The more we charge for our vegetables and fruits, the better we can pay our laborers, and we could get them up to like standards that are quite, even decently acceptable. It's still pretty low wages altogether. But the conundrum is, if we start to actually address or start to sell to markets that are food insecure people, we can't actually charge exorbitant prices, which basically means that the prices have to come out of farmer salaries. And there's a contradiction between the two. Now,
Hmm.
with that, exacerbated by grocery stores who are actually, charging quite a lot of money to be the middlemen between the farmers and the consumers, it makes it so that it's very difficult for both of these parties. The consumers want cheaper food, but the farmers need to get paid more. And the two like are continuously in contradiction with each other.
Hmm. Yeah. I like what you said earlier about the disconnect that most people have, or the connect that they don't have with food, and how doing that on an individual level a lot of the times makes you understand more how this food is made, how where it's coming from and stuff. But yeah, you're right. I don't think a lot of people compost, know how to make their own food, or are self reliant. I'm wondering how you think building more of a self reliance on an individual level can kind of feed into localization on a larger scale.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I've noticed, especially at the Cult of Action Farm, is we have people that have never farmed before, and they come out really because we provide a sense of community. People are not just coming to grow food; they're coming to actually be part of a movement and to be part of like-minded individuals. And I think this is a really big basis for changing kind of the political nature of society, but also we could look at like changing food systems this way also. We create community, we could create our livelihoods also because people are producing things that they could tangibly take home and eat. And we could think of these systems like in a multiplicative fashion. So we have a very small farm at Loyola campus. I've worked with other farms in Lachine and other areas as well. But if we could multiply these, smaller projects and get people connected, I think this is a starting point. Now, if
Hmm.
people start to produce a little bit of food, then what I've noticed is people actually get like a sense of empowerment, and it is really fun for them to actually, take part in other things. I've had people even ask me about like transforming food. We talk a little bit about fermentation in some of my courses, and students seem to get interested in these things also. And what I've noticed is a lot of people, just by kind of dabbling a little bit, get like a sense of empowerment, and then want to continue to learn more and engage more in food processes.
Hmm.
But I think one of the biggest barriers really is people are overworking themselves nowadays. Like rent costs are really, really high. Food costs are really high. Just commodity prices. The cost of going to a concert now is looking at this. It's changed a lot since for in the past like at least 5 to 10 years here. So younger people, like especially people under 44, are not seeing the same incomes that they have in the past, and are having a lot higher prices when it comes to commodities, food, price of living, and all of these things. So it makes it difficult for people to engage. Like it's hard to come out to a farm and partake in community when you're overworking yourself to make your ends meet. So,
Hmm.
to be fair here, what I think we need to do is kind of reduce the amount of labor that we're putting into capitalism, and, start to reproduce our communities and our livelihoods, and start to connect more with each other. And this is hard to say in a way that like we're so dependent on capitalism for our livelihoods that to kind of reduce that is we're kind of caught in a catch-22 scenario. So yeah, I
Hmm.
encourage people to kind of dabble a little bit and kind of give the time that they can to start connecting with their food, but I understand the barriers are quite real also.
Yeah. I hear a lot of what you're saying earlier as well when you're talking about urban agriculture is about um, a lot to do with city planning as well, at least from what I'm hearing, is when you talk about edible forests and making food part of the landscape so that we're connecting to it outside of just the grocery store in our kitchens, but what we see um, on a walk or on a day to day basis as well,
Hmm.
um, and building that connection on a larger scale, I suppose.
Yeah. Like we don't
Yeah.
need to think about food as like being something that isn't a grocery store or restaurant, but something that we're surrounded by, that actually we're part of. It's part of us and we're part of it also.
Hmm. I want to ask, how long have you been working in urban agriculture and with your co-op and urban farming?
Yeah, so the co-op has been around now since 2022, so it's actually quite new.
Okay.
I've been working in urban agriculture, like I've been doing kind of dabbling in my own food production, I would say for over 10 years now, but close to
Okay.
maybe 15 years.
Yeah.
And I got really invested into not just growing food, but transforming, fermenting, doing all like a whole bunch of different things. Uh, but like when it came to formally getting involved in urban agriculture was actually when the pandemic hit. I in 2020 realized there was actually an urban farm right beside where I lived, and went there to help out because I knew food insecurity was actually like hitting a high during the pandemic, and these projects I think are really important. So I got involved in 2020, and at that point, actually, formally even ran one of the farms in Lachine, small scale urban farm, but nonetheless, is quite important for the area there. And since then, basically looked at trying to do this in the bigger picture. So I'm trying to think of how can we actually emancipate small spaces like we have, quarter of an acre, to if we could get an acre in the city, that would be amazing. But I don't know how possible that or easy that would be. But if we could emancipate these small spaces, we could grow a lot of food through what we call spin farming methods. So it's small plot intensive farming. And I think that it would really benefit the communities in and around Montreal for the city to emancipate these spaces for people to be able to come together and grow food.
Hmm. Have you noticed any limitations with urban farming or things that you would like to see improved?
Yeah, there for sure there's limitations. So, like to be fair, urban farms are not going to feed the world here. We do need to connect to other farms with more space potential. Like to grow wheat in the middle of a city, you'd need a lot of space for that. To grow certain grains, to grow like corn, on a scale that is meaningful, to grow potatoes on a scale that's meaningful. So we do need more space for those things.
Hmm.
But we could grow, like I was saying, like arugula, radishes, kale, leafy greens, tomatoes, cucumbers, all of the fast producing or, things that don't require too much space could be grown in the middle of the city also. So I really
Mhm.
think that urban agriculture is a good way to introduce people to growing food. And I think we need to connect this to rural farming that is close by the areas that we're looking at the distribution, as well as maybe peri-urban farming as well. But on that, there is a lot of space in the city as well that people could actually convert their own yards into like kind of food forests or small scale gardens as well. And I think that would start to change the urban landscape of food. For example, in my backyard, I could produce more cucumbers that I could consume in a year. I end up giving some to my neighbors, converting things to pickles and all of this stuff. If we have abundance and people start to share it, we're really going to change the way that food is understood in the city. And I think we'll have an impact on food prices because people will be less dependent on grocery stores. And
Mhm.
this is how we could start to make these changes.
Yeah, absolutely. What are you working on with Cult of Action Co-op at the moment, and what are sort of your plans for the future with it?
Yeah, so at the moment, we're actually about to launch a new urban agriculture certificate initiative that's going to start in 2024.
Mm.
So that's going to start in May. We actually have the farm space at Loyola campus as well, so that's going to continue. We're actually quite lucky. We are now a fee levy group with the ASFA students, so we're actually going to be running all of our programs that pay what you can.
Hmm.
Basically, if anyone needs food, they could either just come and work with us a little bit and get free food, or come to the markets and it's pay what you can.
Hmm.
We actually have another farm space in Senville, which is in the West Island. So we have a couple little plots there as well, and hopefully we're going to expand this year and have a little bit more space. So linking, urban agriculture with peri-urban agriculture. But I'm also working with people in Lachine as well to expand the urban agriculture in Lachine. There are
Hmm.
spaces that hopefully will be developed into urban agriculture, and I'm working with a couple groups here. In the bigger picture, though, I have students, like I have a class of 80 right now, and I'm encouraging them to do projects in their own communities. To me, like what we've set up is a model for other people to be doing something that's similar as well. They could kind of take what we've got, look at our growing methods, and look at like what we've put together, and basically replicate this quite easily. And this is what I'm hoping for: is to replicate these projects across Montreal, and then we're going to actually start to have more of a dent on the food system.
Hmm. Great. Well, thank you so much, Eric. This has been such a pleasure chatting with you. Yeah, really appreciate your insights on food security and food sovereignty in the city.
Yeah, well, thank you so much too. I really appreciate this, and yeah, feel free to reach out whenever you want to.